Thank you everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon, wherever you happen to be, or evening maybe if on the other side of the world. I'm very happy to have the second iteration of our Research and Action series today, and to be inviting Helena Arose and Liz Fraccaro to join us. I'll just give a brief introduction. My name is Vanessa Workman. I am the co-chair of the Early Career Scholars Committee at ASOR. And just wanted to show a couple resources before we get started with the session for anyone that's joining us for the first time. That we have our Facebook page where most of our announcements are up, in a group where you please feel free to post things going on in our community, sessions, jobs, workshops, etc. We're just starting a LinkedIn page for those who are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is new for me, so I'm still working that out, but we're there. We have a presence, so please feel free to, I don't know what the LinkedIn terminology, to friend us, to join us, to like us on LinkedIn. Occasionally we're on our Instagram. You should see any of our events will pop up there. And then if you're curious about our committee and who's on our committee, please check us out on the ASOR website. The second resource I'll mention on the ASOR website is under this Publications and Resources tab. I hope you can all see my mouse here. And just at the very bottom there is this Early Career Member Resources page. There's lots of stuff going on there, completely open, completely free, about job searching, grants and fellowships, and general resources. And over the past few years, we've been generating lots of videos, both with these types of sessions and individual videos that scholars and career people have been making for us to go up there. So please check those out. All of these sessions go onto our YouTube page and get linked onto there. So there's lots of fantastic information. So I'll just point those great resources out or point those out to you, excuse me, for you to enjoy. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ashley Koga, who will be hosting our event today.
Hi, everyone. I'm an undergraduate member of the Early Career Scholars Committee, and I'm very happy to be introducing our speakers today, Helena Arose and Liz Fraccaro. Helena currently serves as the Director of Programs at the Antiquities Coalition. Helena graduated from the University of Glasgow in 2018 with a Master's of Science in Art History, collecting in provenance in an international context, and she's an archaeologist by training. She holds a BA in archaeology from Johns Hopkins University. At the Antiquities Coalition, Liz Fraccaro serves as a legal consultant. She also has directed the Antiquities Coalition's Financial Crimes Task Force. Ms. Fraccaro graduated in 2012 from Indiana University with bachelor's degrees in anthropology and English literature. She has also earned an MA in Mediterranean archaeology from University College London in 2014. She's earned her Juris Doctor from DePaul University College of Law with a certificate in Art, Museum, and Cultural Heritage Law. I would also like to invite attendees to ask questions in the chat throughout the session, which can then be read by me during the discussion session to follow. And with that, I'll turn it over to our two speakers. Thank you so much, Helena and Liz, for coming today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Helena, as Ashley said. It's really a pleasure to be here today to speak with you all, and we want to thank ASOR and the Early Career Scholars Committee so much for having us today. It's really exciting. As Ashley mentioned, we really view this as more of a discussion, so we'd love to hear questions from you in the chat so we can really tailor our conversation to be useful. I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about the work of the Antiquities Coalition, for those of you who may not be familiar. And then Liz and I will discuss a little bit about our own career paths. And then, like I said, we really would be happy to take your questions and hear about your own experiences as well. So again, thank you so much. I'll just begin. So the Antiquities Coalition is a small nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C. We are dedicated to fighting the illicit trade of art and antiquities, and also wider crimes within the art market. We were founded in 2014 in the aftermath of the Arab Spring by our founder, Deborah Lair, who was working in government at the time and really viewed this as a security issue, as objects were coming out of the Middle East, entering the US market, which is the largest in the world, and funding some of the conflict and crime that was taking place there. And so as our mission, we really work to approach this issue and this topic from a security lens, also an economic lens. I would say we really focus more on law and policy than on-the-ground preservation efforts. There are a lot of great organizations, ASOR included, that do great on-the-ground research, and our focus is really more on the law and policy side. When we started our work, as I mentioned, public policy really treated this as a white collar or a victimless crime. I think maybe all of us who have worked in the cultural space or are studying in it have seen this occur. And we really work to change the narrative on that through all of our efforts. Cultural racketeering is not just a threat to history, which we can all appreciate, I think, as people in this field, but it's also a threat to national economies, global security, and global stability, as we've seen, in recent conflicts around the world. We work around a number of priorities that I'm showing here: understanding and communicating the problem, developing solutions, closing U.S. markets to illicit antiquities, convening with purpose, and encouraging responsible markets and trade practices. These are all kind of overlapping and interoperational in terms of our goals, but we separate them, in terms of our programming. As we all know, understanding the size of the illicit trade is something that's really difficult. That's the biggest question we always get asked when we're in meetings with policymakers, is what's the scale and scope of the problem? But measuring an illicit trade is not that simple. Particularly when we're looking at antiquities, which is a gray market. And that means that there are instances, cases, and examples when antiquities can be sold legally. On top of that, those of us who study art history or who are working in museums know that different experts can look at an object and give it 3 different values, and they can all be right, depending on if they're looking at the raw material, the age, the demand on the market. The value can really fluctuate, and not just by hundreds of dollars. We're talking by thousands or tens of thousands. So that can make it really difficult. On top of that, as a former archaeologist, or a trained archaeologist, I should say, recovering archaeologist myself, the monetary value is not the most important part that we are focused on. At the Antiquities Coalition, we really see the harm and the loss of information of the antiquity itself as the major thing, but we understand why policymakers need this information in order to do their work, in order to prioritize the resources, et cetera. So this is something that we work on through all kinds of different measures, our public resources, our outreach, and our journalism engagement. Closing U.S. markets to illicit antiquities. I should say the U.S. is the largest art market in the world, as I mentioned. And because of that, we are a big part of the problem for why antiquities are being looted from countries around the world and coming to our market. So this is something that we focus on. It's a priority of ours to work within the specifications of U.S. law, and also to raise awareness about the tools that are available to countries for engaging with U.S. law enforcement on this issue. Convening with purpose, bringing together stakeholders is something that's relevant for almost any issue. With ours, we really focus on, as I said, this issue has long been approached from the cultural perspective. ASOR knows this well, I think. It's long been the archaeologists sounding the alarms of sites that are being looted, or museum workers, people who care about heritage, who are raising awareness about this crime. But as I said, as an archaeologist myself, I don't have the tools to fight transnational organized crime. And we see the same at the government and the international scale. This issue is usually housed in the Ministry of Culture or in the UN at UNESCO, where they just were never meant to be crime-fighting organizations. And because of that, you really need to build awareness and build coalition around this issue that includes law enforcement, your ministries of justice, your economic ministries, all of the relevant players at the table. That's not to say the cultural people are not needed. Of course they are, as key stakeholders and subject matter experts, but we really work to bring other players who can address this as an issue of crime. And then encouraging responsible markets and trades. I think Liz will be able to speak about this a little bit more in her conversation, but In 2020, we really started to see the need for growing awareness around financial crimes in the art market. And we founded our Financial Crimes Task Force, which put out the report we see in the upper left-hand corner. Recommendations for combating financial crimes within the US art market, again, the largest in the world. These are things like money laundering, sanctions evasion, fraud, forgery, tax issues. And similar to our work on antiquities, looting, and trafficking, we saw that, the people that are addressing financial crimes and the people who work in the art market and the art industry were almost speaking two different languages. And so we brought together the task force to begin to start to form these networks, to form these relationships, and that has continued to build out as the US art market still remains outside of our standard anti-money laundering framework here in the US. This is in comparison to the EU and China, which are other major art markets that are regulated by standard anti-money laundering laws, as well as other industries of comparable size and scale in the US, like jewelry, even real estate now, cars, pawn shops, things like this. So this is a growing issue that we're working on. And then developing solutions. I've already mentioned a couple of our task forces. This is something that we really use to help bring together the right people to provide recommendations for policymakers and for legal analysis. We also have an award-winning think tank, which provides scholars and practitioners with an opportunity to draft specific policy recommendations for a variety of different topics. You can see some examples here, and I encourage you all to check out our think tank website where you can download the papers for free or just become familiar with some of those resources. A little bit more about the AC and our team. I've put our board here. I mentioned Deborah Lair as our chairman and founder. And then this is the rest of our board, just to emphasize that we're really a small team. Our staff, Tess Davis is the executive director. She has a long history of work in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. We really started our work as an organization in the Middle East and North Africa, as I mentioned. But of course, this is a global problem, and particularly with Tess's expertise as an archaeologist and lawyer, we've been able to expand around the world to Southeast Asia, Central Asia, etc. Tess has been with the organization almost since its founding, and we're really excited to be celebrating our 10th year in 2024. And then there's me and Liz, who we're about to discuss further. If you have all seen the new Indiana Jones movie, there was an archaeologist in the movie with the name Helena, which was very exciting for me and any other archaeologist named Helena, which is why I have this picture up here. But I'm happy to now turn it over to Liz to just talk a little bit about her work with us and her background.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful intro, Helena. And again, I'm really happy to be here and honored to be invited to speak. As Helena mentioned, and also Ashley in my intro, I obviously have a pretty extensive background in cultural heritage, starting out with my archaeology degrees. And had you told me when I was an undergrad that 7 years later I would be an attorney, I would not have believed you. I had no intention of going to law school or becoming a lawyer. I really thought I was going to go a kind of traditional route into academia and into a PhD. And so I think it may be helpful to explain my career path and how I ended up here, because it can illuminate just how many twists and turns this can take, and also really speaks to the variety of options that will appear to you as you progress in your career. So as mentioned, I started out with undergrad at Indiana University, and really speaking to how little 18-year-olds know about themselves, I fully thought I was going to become a journalist. I chose Indiana University for their journalism program. I took one anthro class freshman year, fell in love, and never, ever entered the journalism school. So already the first twist of fate was just discovering anthropology and then therein discovering archaeology. I had a really great set of professors at Indiana University who really encouraged me to get experience in the field before choosing to go further in that path of academia. And so rather than applying immediately for grad school, I spent a year working as a nanny and then also taking advantage of dig programs and a field school in Rome. Confirmed that I did indeed love archaeology, and then applied for grad school at UCL. I did my master's in Mediterranean archaeology, and then returned back to the States, back to Chicago, where I'm from and grew up, and volunteered for the Field Museum before getting an offer for a job with them. I also want to emphasize that, again, I had to volunteer first, and I took a retail job in the meantime to support myself, because it is quite difficult to get your foot in the door in this field and in institutions like museums. I had a lot of experience interning and volunteering throughout undergrad and grad school at museums, both at Indiana University, at their campus museum. And then in London, I volunteered at 2 museums, the Grant Museum of Zoology and the British Museum. And even with all of that experience, I still needed to get my foot in the door at the Field Museum, where I didn't know anyone. And so I started by volunteering for them. And then, received a job offer. And at this point, I was really weighing my options of, did I want to continue my career in the museum space? If so, how? And meanwhile, I was also being heavily encouraged to get a doctorate, to kind of finish my academic path and then return to the museum world. Around this time, I was also starting to become more and more aware of how the issues affecting museum collections and collections management aren't really stemming from the collection at hand and the people who are working with it today. This is systemic issues that started hundreds of years ago, long before the museums were even built. And those policies and the cultural attitudes over time resulted in these collections that were, fraught, to put it simply. And I don't think I need to go into great detail about this. Everyone, I think, is aware that museum collections and maintaining them and keeping all stakeholders feeling involved and happy is a near impossible task, and with increasingly limited funding as well at these institutions. While working at the Field Museum, as collections management staff, we would kind of randomly be assigned tours of the collection space when we would get requests to do so. And most often this was for groups like Boy Scout groups or Girl Scout groups. Occasionally it would be undergrad classes. And so one week I was assigned one of these tours, and it was for a group of law students. And I was like, what? Why are law students coming here? And that is how I met Patty Gerstenblith, who runs the Art, Museum, and Cultural Heritage Law program at DePaul University College of Law. And so now I think you can see why I ended up being a lawyer. I was fascinated by her program. I saw a lot of opportunity to get involved in a way that felt meaningful to me, affecting policy change, if I were to enter the legal space and come at this problem with a legal degree and with that experience and knowledge, and kind of attack it again at that policy level rather than the collection level. And so that's how I ended up going to law school. And I remained in Chicago. I went to DePaul University's College of Law. I studied under Patty Gerstenblith. And in that time, I threw myself into internships and volunteering experiences because I really felt like I was out of my depth. I didn't have any legal experience, and certainly not with cultural heritage law. So I interned again at the Field Museum, but this time with their general counsel. I interned at the Chicago History Museum. I interned with the University of Geneva's Art Law Center, where they produce research on international law and compile case studies. which is an invaluable resource for lawyers to look for precedent, and just in general for us to point to the fact that there are consistent issues within the art and antiquities market. And I also interned with the Institute of Museum and Library Services in DC, which is under the umbrella of the NEH. And yeah, just like really, really, you know, did my best to get a lot of practical on the ground experience, which is something I'd also like to emphasize is I think very important at every stage of your career in education. Classroom study is hugely important, right? That's where you get your basic knowledge upon which you build your experience. But getting experience that kind of complements that is just invaluable. And it's also a really good way for you to find out what you like and don't like, and what is a good fit in your career and what is not. Even going back to undergrad, when I had that professor encourage me to go to a field school before applying for grad school, I'm so grateful, because had I disliked that, it would have been absolutely the wrong choice to continue to pursue a path in archaeology. And thankfully I did enjoy it. But there are certainly other experiences that informed me in the other way. I interned with a boutique copyright and trademark firm while I was in law school, and realized that kind of the traditional firm route, working in big law, was just not for me. And that was a really informative experience as well, you know, to tell me what I don't like and what would not be the right way to pursue a career in this field. And yeah, and upon graduation, that is when I received the offer to work with Antiquities Coalition. The Antiquities Coalition's Financial Crimes Task Force was just getting started. I didn't know anything about financial crime at the time. I really jumped into the deep end, and had a lot of wonderful people on that task force who helped me learn the ropes. And, you know, it was a really incredible opportunity for folks from one side of the issue, the financial regulation side, people who work at banks, who work for regulators, learning about this market. Meanwhile, us kind of coming from the market side, knowing everything there is to know about antiquities and art and art history, learning about, okay, well, what's the financial aspect of this? How are people abusing this marketplace for financial means and financial reasons, as opposed to what we had knowledge of people, you know, trafficking objects that have been looted, or selling objects that are fakes or stolen. We were familiar with that, but we didn't know anything about the kind of financial crime aspect. So that was a really amazing learning experience for me. And we produced our Financial Crimes Task Force report, which is a white paper, which is available on our website for free. I really encourage you, if you are interested in this issue, to give it a look. And it's something that's kind of ongoing. We're still advocating for regulation of this market. I can't say that we are the reason that this happened, but we have seen some success from our efforts and from others' efforts to get this regulated, and that the art market is going to be coming under regulation from the US Department of Treasury. In the future, they have been mandated to create regulations for it, but it's not so for the antiquities market at this time. And we see, you know, again, there's regulations in other countries and other jurisdictions that are much stricter and heavier than those here in the US, which makes US vulnerable to these crimes, because if you can't commit it in the EU or the UK, but you can in the US, well, then where are the criminals going to take their business? To the US. I realize I kind of rambled a bit there, but I would like to turn the stage back over to Helena to go over her career, and then maybe we can take some questions.
Thank you, Liz. I get such good advice from Liz too, so it's always good to hear. I think my path is similar to Liz's in some ways, but different in others. So I'll just go over it quickly as well. I was always interested in archaeology and history growing up in North Carolina. I was able to participate in some work there before I headed to undergraduate at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. There we did not actually have an archaeology department, but we had an archaeology degree, and they were, as Liz mentioned, in her experience, they did require an excavation as part of the study, and they were also encouraging, or I should say, required us to kind of specialize in one area of the world or a subject matter. I was really not wanting to take Greek or Latin. Sorry to my ASOR colleagues. I was like doing whatever I could to avoid that. So I decided to specialize in art history and museum studies, where you didn't have to take Greek or Latin. And that really helped me to understand a little bit more about the museum world and their interaction with archaeology, with the field of archaeology. Johns Hopkins actually has a small archaeological museum that I was lucky enough to work at all 4 years of my undergraduate study, where I really learned about documentation, collection, provenance research, what it's like to manage an archaeological collection, things of that nature. Working with a university collection, I should say as well, that was meant more for study and research than display. And I also was fortunate enough to gain a scholarship to excavate at a site in Cyprus after my sophomore year to fulfill that requirement for my degree. And that was really impactful for me because the site that I excavated at had actually been completely looted out from like the time of colonial, I guess, colonial times all the way to the modern day. The site was actually discovered from looters sharing information with the dig director, who was from the area. They trusted him enough to let him know where they were getting the items. And he then built out basically a program that at that point had been running for 25 years. And had resulted in a lot of tourism and economic benefits for the community, including a new museum, a lab, a yearly program, as I mentioned, which was really, as someone interested in archaeology, I was from that both able to really see the effects of looting on like archaeological study and understanding of the site, but also the benefits to community that archaeology can have. And when I returned from that, I started to just look more into like, do people study antiquities looting? What's out there in terms of information on this? From that experience, I really wanted to learn more. And similar to Liz, I found somebody whose work I was really interested in. Her name is Dr. Donna Yates, who some of you may be familiar with or know about her work. She's currently working at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And I will say she has a great career resources page that I'll be citing in some of my advice. She has given me great advice over the years that I'm really grateful for, and I encourage you all to check it out, particularly if you're interested in pursuing further study specifically on antiquities trafficking. She has a lot of great information on her website, which I have linked in the next page. But basically, once I found her, there's really no other way to say it. I just sort of like outright stalked her. Eventually, she came over. At the time, she was at the University of Glasgow. Eventually, she came to the US for a conference. I went, like, broke into the conference, went to her session, went up to her. And then we were able to have some conversations from there. I applied to study under her at the University of Glasgow for a 1-year master's program. Directly after I graduated undergrad, and was fortunate enough to be accepted and did my thesis under her. The months following my graduation from that program, I was really focused on finding full-time work in something at this field. I did not have a lot of success in the first 6 months of my application process. Similar to Liz, I was working other jobs, not in the field, to, support myself. I always am realistic about this time because I think it's worth being honest about. I applied to like somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 jobs. I will say I was focused originally on staying on the East Coast because of where my family was located, where I wanted to live, but I eventually, expanded to all across the US. I made it to about, I would say, like 20 phone interviews and 5 kind of, I guess, last round interviews from those 200 across those 6 months. And eventually I ended up switching to look for part-time work and grant work. And I accepted a job working at a museum collection in my hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina. It was part-time, it was 20 hours a week, without benefits, which was unfortunate, but it did give me some time. It was enough that I could support myself, and it did give me some time to, like Liz said, pursue some related activities. So I worked on publishing a few articles that I had drafted during grad school, and I reached out to Tess at the Antiquities Coalition because I had interned with them while doing my graduate degree. And I said, hey, I have some extra time during the week. Do you want to finish the project that we were working on while I was, interning with you? And she was like, no, but I do have some other work that we need some help on if you're willing to support it. And I was like, absolutely. So I was initially hired, I think, just on one grant in 2019. Then I was able to come on fully part-time as a research associate, so 20 hours a week. And I had those 2 jobs to equal 40 hours for about 2 years. When COVID happened, it became really difficult for the museum to support the part-time workers that were working in collections. And I was really lucky that by that time we had enough grant projects. I was working as a project director then. We had enough grant projects that I was able to come on full-time at the Antiquities Coalition in 2021. So I've been full-time for about 3 years now, and I became director of programs last year. And that is just kind of a general overview of my trajectory. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so I'll just talk a little bit about some resources and some key takeaways. A lot are similar to what Liz said, but just advice that, maybe I would give. I really struggle with giving advice, especially about working in this field, because there's a lot of work, but there's not a lot of framework built yet to support that work, and that makes it difficult. I think really good advice that Donna gives on her website, which is listed here, it's called Anonymous Swiss Collector. They also have a career and conference newsletter that goes out where she posts jobs. It's mostly in Europe, but it's definitely worth following just to kind of see what's out there. But to go back on to her advice, in this field, you really have to make your own path, because there's no set destination and there's no set path. There's no final job title like antiquities trafficking researcher that you're going to find out there. Cultural heritage is such a big field. There's so many different ways to work on it that I would say my first piece of advice is to really think about what you like to do day to day. So literally, do you like to be outside? Do you like to be, interfacing with people? Do you like to be on your computer, in your room? Do you want to work remote? Do you want to work in an office? These kind of things are a huge factor because, in the US at least, we're still facing a 40 to 60 hour work week, no matter what, which is a majority of our time. So you really want to think about, what do you want to spend the majority of your time doing? Size of institution is another really big thing that I like to stress. Working in a smaller organization like I do now is really different than working in a large museum or a large collection as I have in the past. And they both have their benefits and drawbacks, and it's really about what you like, what kind of structure you want, what kind of support you want, and again, what you want your day-to-day to look like. I would say something I really like about my job here at the AC is because we're so small, I get to work on a lot of different things that range from basic nonprofit management all the way to, our more programmatic efforts. I have travel, but a lot of times, I'm at my desk working on sending emails and, grant budgets and grant reporting. So just thinking about the different types of things you'd like to do and the type of organization that's going to make that available to you is really cannot stress the importance of that. A second thing, like advice that I always got was network. And I think Liz and I have both mentioned like different women who have really inspired us and been amazing mentors to us. But whenever I got that advice, I really hated it because I don't consider myself a very outgoing person. And it was really hard for me to hear like, get out there and network. So I didn't really understand what that looked like. I didn't really feel comfortable, just like, despite my stalking story, going up to people. And I didn't even really know what I was trying to get out of it. So I just want to say, like, with that, what I've found that works for me is like to really, it doesn't mean like meeting as many people as possible. I think it's just talking to people that you're interested in what they're doing and talking to them about what you're interested in as well. And so even if you meet like 1 or 2 people that are really supportive of you and interested in what you're saying, like that's enough. It's been enough for me. It hasn't been about like building this huge, though I will say if you love talking to people and meeting people, that's like, do it that way, just do what works for you and you'll be able to get what you need out of it. I think when you have a conversation with someone in this field whose work you are interested in, definitely have a goal of like what you want to learn from them or what you want to ask them, because people are happy to share that. They want to help, but if you don't come to them with like a specific ask or something to share with them, it can just be difficult. I would recommend that. I would also say like be open, especially as early career workers, to part-time and grant work. There's actually more stability there in a lot of cases than, some grant projects you can work on for 1 to 3 years, which is similar to an entry-level job, something you might just do for a few years. And while it doesn't necessarily have, it may not be ideal in terms of like what kind of benefits it's going to be able to offer you, it's definitely an option that I wish I had considered sooner, because I think my job search would have been maybe shorter. And it's a great way to see, especially if you're trying to decide about additional school, it's a great way to see like, okay, this is what an academic project is actually like, or this is what a research project is actually like. As Liz said, it's so important to just try out different things, because if you hate it, then, don't go do a PhD. Another piece of advice that I like to give, which some of you may disagree with me on, and I totally understand that, but really do not go into debt for higher education at this stage in this field. This is a really dynamic, ever-changing field where, like I said, you can make your own path. It's not a field where people are looking for that degree from Harvard or for that degree from X university. It's really about practical experience and interest and research and, like I said, building your own path. And so there's really no need to pay a lot of money for a degree. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in Europe and across the world, actually, for lots of interesting interdisciplinary programs that will get you the knowledge base, as Liz mentioned, that you need, that are just very cost effective, if not free. And I would really encourage someone who did study abroad for their master's degree for that reason. I would really encourage it, because it makes a big difference if you do not have debt. And if you can do whatever you can for yourself to not have debt, I should say. Everyone's situation is obviously different. That gives you some more flexibility to do more of that path building that I've discussed. And so I've just put like different types of jobs and work that we see people in our field go into: academia, museums and heritage institutions, IGOs, NGOs, auction houses, galleries, government, law, insurance, copyright, think tanks. I'm in DC right now. DC has hundreds of think tanks who work on, there'll be a think tank just on the Middle East. And you may not think of this as a place to do cultural heritage work, but maybe they need someone researching cultural heritage. So it's not always like immediately apparent. And sometimes maybe you have to come in as the researcher on Kuwait and you do a project on cultural heritage. This is sort of what I mean. You just have to find a place where you can infuse this into it, because it's really a part of everything, as we all know. Sometimes it just takes some time to get it prioritized and make your mark on it. So sorry, Liz, anything you want to add? And I think we're getting some questions.
Yeah, I noticed the questions coming in as well. I wanted to say I agree with Helena, and I say this as someone who took on the debt of going to law school, but really weigh your options. Do not take on debt unnecessarily. I'm not saying don't go into higher education, but again, I think particularly in the US, it is extremely costly, and that's not to say those programs aren't good. But again, there are many, many ways to get the experience in education, and this is not a field that traditionally pays very highly. And so when you are taking on any amount of debt, you really should consider it very seriously. Again, I also did my master's overseas. I happened to also know that UCL was the best rated program at that time. I don't know if they still are, but you know, they were kind of going back and forth between Cambridge and UCL, who's the best program, and UCL was so much more cost effective for me to attend, even compared to Cambridge, which I didn't even end up applying to, but I did apply to a number of programs in the UK and the US, and it just did not make sense for me to spend a ton of money to get a degree in the US when I could get the same degree for much less money and from a better ranked institution in the UK. And that was with living in London, which is insanely expensive. It still was a more cost-effective decision. So again, I just want to echo that. And also to reiterate what Helena and I have kind of been saying over and over, and I know this is so frustrating to hear, but there is no one way to get a career in this field. I so desperately wanted someone to give me the step-by-step, like if you do these 5 things, you will for sure get a job offer in this field. Like there simply isn't. And it's because this is simultaneously an incredibly niche field, and also it is hugely expansive. It is everywhere. And you know, as Helena was trying to explain, like you could be the researcher on Kuwait and get to do a cultural heritage project with that. I say this a lot to law students who ask me questions about how do I become an attorney and lawyer practicing in this field, and my answer is really like, you won't. You are going to have a job that does something else, and you are going to be the expert in cultural heritage as it overlaps with that. So a classmate and friend of mine went into international trade law. She works for Customs and Border Protection. So her day-to-day is immigration law. It is drug seizures at the border. But if and when an antiquities or art law case comes across their desk, it immediately goes to her because she is the expert. You know, so she gets to do this and she gets to practice in this field, but it is not necessarily what her job title even is. And similarly, my work for Antiquities Coalition is often in cultural heritage law, but I also do things on compliance and nonprofit compliance and grant compliance, doing research on copyright law. I mean, it really can run the gamut. And so doing a highly specialized degree or program is not necessarily the best way to get a career off on its feet. I also know Victoria Reed recently posted on LinkedIn with some really amazing career suggestions if you're interested in going into provenance research. And she also kind of reiterated what we're saying here is give yourself an education and background that is applicable more widely rather than kind of getting hyper-focused and narrowed and therefore limiting your options when you do graduate. I think that's about all I had to say. I think maybe we should take some questions now.
Really quick, I want to, because I've seen a couple of questions that overlap. Sorry to take your role, Ashley, but I was just looking through as Liz was talking, and I'm seeing questions about programs and ways to get like both academic programs to look for and also how to get your foot in the door in different places. And as I go through these types of work, I can just kind of cover some of that, I think. I would say for academic programs in this field, don't look for, and maybe other fields too, don't look for a program, look for a person. You want to find an advisor that you really connect with, who's going to support you in your research ethically and in a committed manner, who you really appreciate and connect with their work. That's the most important thing, and it's the thing that's going to make sure that you have the best experience. So just look, for research papers that are on the subject you're interested in, find the people that are writing and researching on this, and then backtrack to the institution. That would be my advice. In terms of getting your foot in the door at organizations, it's really difficult to give standard advice on this. I think things that I wish I had done, beyond interning and volunteering, I should say, interning and volunteering is not sustainable for everyone, especially after graduation. So I don't really like to give it as advice, but I guess, it should be said. Some things that I think would have set me apart, that I wish I had had experience in, are grant writing, grant reporting, and nonprofit management. I think some of the advice that our executive director gives is you do not need a background in archaeology to work on antiquities trafficking. And I hope that came out clearly in my presentation about our work, is that we view this as a crime issue and an international studies issue, and a diplomacy issue, and all kinds of different fields intersect with it. And so you can really come at this from any background, but the things that are going to help you get a job in the day-to-day are going to be some of those practical skills that you maybe didn't get in your undergraduate, because how could you? They're just not offered, but there are some different online certifications or, experiences that you can have where those practical skills are really going to come in handy. Grant writing is going to be a part of any nonprofit that you work for, whether it's a museum or an issue-focused nonprofit. So I really think that that's like maybe a concrete thing that I could recommend. I put a little star on law enforcement because a lot of times we get questions about how to join the FBI art crime team, or how to join our HSI art squad, or how to join the Carabinieri art crime team, which are law enforcement working on cases in this issue. And I would say, I don't know if it's going to be like this forever, but right now there's absolutely no way to join these from the outside. These are all people who have worked, like Liz said, with her your friend example. These are people who have worked in the FBI for 15 years and are assigned to this portfolio. Yes.
In fact, I can tell you firsthand, because I have spoken with and know two people who work on the FBI art crime team here in the Chicago office. They have no background in this whatsoever. They are just very good FBI agents, and that is why they got picked for this. And it was frustrating at first when I met, one of these guys was like, my best case was this trafficking of this football jersey that was signed and someone stole it. And that ended up with the art crime team because it was something that was being sold on that market. And he was thrilled about that and could not have cared less about his cases that dealt with the antiquities that I so care about. But again, he's an incredible FBI agent. And so he did a great job with all of these cases, but he had no personal background in it, no educational background in it whatsoever. So again, for the law enforcement side, you need to be really interested in the law enforcement work, not so much the antiquities thing. Famously, the Manhattan DA's office has an antiquities trafficking team, and they prosecute a lot, but all of those are people who work for the Manhattan DA first. They are dealing with homicides, they are dealing with other crimes, and this is just an aspect of their work. So if you want to work for the Manhattan DA's antiquities team, you need to be okay with the idea that you're going to be also prosecuting homicides, and you are going to be a Manhattan DA first. So yeah.
That's a really good point, and it's the same, I think, for those law enforcement other groups, and absolutely law enforcement is a huge part of this issue, and if you're interested in that, I think it's definitely a way that you might be able to get involved, but you also the majority of your work at this stage, because of the priorities of our government, are going to be other cases. Something else I would say in terms of gaps where we see there's going to be a need for people to fill. I'm glad that Liz brought up Victoria Reed, who's the provenance curator at the MFA. Museum of Fine Arts Boston, we are seeing more museums have to develop and hire provenance curators. We saw the Met do this as recently as this year. And I think that's going to start to, maybe not, this year or next year, but that's going to start to be a big area where they're going to need expertise. And they're going to be looking for that and different certifications. I think in big museums in the US, absolutely. Someone put a question about working in Europe. I think that's going to be the same there too. We're starting to see. I did look at and consider some jobs in Europe. The reason I didn't prioritize it was because of like personal family stuff. I wanted to be closer to my family here in the US. But Europe, I should say different institutions, countries, people in Europe are doing a lot on this issue because there's just a lot of built heritage that's present in European countries that inspires, different efforts, unlike what we live kind of day to day here in the US. So I would say there's lots of organizations there. If you're American and interested in working in Europe, I would consider connecting with, again, people whose work you're interested in and just asking them some of the issues, the complications of working in another country are, work visas, permits. Sometimes someone who's hiring, they're not going to want to invest if there's like a job in France and a French person applies and an American person applies of equal qualification. They don't necessarily want to invest in the person who's they're going to have to sponsor, give a work
And
permit.
they may not legally be allowed to,
Exactly.
depending on what the immigration laws are. At the time I was doing my master's in London, I did not want to leave London. I wanted to stay. I tried really hard to get a job there. This was pre-Brexit, but Theresa May was the Home Secretary, and it was incredibly anti-immigrant. And moreover, for every job I applied to, if there was an equally qualified candidate who was from the UK or the EU, they were required to hire that person over me or present a convincing argument when they had to sponsor my visa as to why I was more qualified. And that was next to impossible. And so I wasn't able to stay in London. And that is why I moved back to Chicago specifically, because I just had no other plans. I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm coming home. But again, that is just a real struggle for Americans, but also just if you don't have the citizenship of the country in which you want to work, visa sponsorship is a hurdle. It just, yeah.
And it just adds like another layer of competitiveness that's difficult, in such a small field if you're going for these really specialized cultural heritage or antiquities jobs. Going back to gaps, we always say the things that Liz works on financial crimes are like, there is no one working on this. We saw this when we put together our financial crimes task force. In the United States, nobody is really focused on studying or researching financial crimes in the art market. And there are so many different places you could look at and work to study this. But I also think as we move forward with regulation, Liz mentioned the antiquities market is being regulated. The art market is not yet regulated, but we really believe it's going to be in the future. Art auction houses, galleries, they're going to need experts to help them comply with these regulations and to work on these efforts. I think another thing that we often see in the policy space, and I see a question about like being too focused in antiquities trafficking to be hired for an antiquities trafficking job. I think take that experience and go to somewhere general. Go to a think tank on crime. Go to a think tank or a department in a government on foreign policy. And I see a question about foreign service. In the United States, there absolutely are options for cultural heritage work in the foreign service. Every single embassy, I shouldn't say that, most embassies that we have around the world have something called a cultural affairs officer, which is a post where you are, responsible for all different types of cultural things, like I should say, like, performance art, exchanges, education, but also cultural heritage issues. And we work with these types of people all the time in our job. But I would say take your specialization and bring it somewhere general. Again, at our organization, we do not see this as a cultural issue. So we are always encouraging these other types of people who study other types of crime, don't forget about this, take this lens. And I think there's always going to be a need for that specialization. I'm going to keep looking at the questions. Liz, are you looking at them too? I'm so sorry,
Yeah,
Ashley.
no, I'm trying to get through them. And also
Yeah.
I realized I think I may have misspoke earlier. I said both opposites. Sorry. The antiquities market is coming under regulation, like under financial regulation here in the US, but not the art market. And unlike in the EU and other major market countries where it's all together being regulated. And so again, that's why we see an increase in crime here, because there's these loopholes. And also, again, that question of like, what's the difference between an antiquity and art? That's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So again, when we're looking at policy issues, if you are interested in this, kind of looking at this from a more general space is always helpful to kind of give you that background and knowledge, because yeah, being hyper-focused is just an unfortunate truth that it is actually a hindrance to you getting a job. Any other practical skills? Helena, you mentioned grant writing. For nonprofits, I think nonprofit management is huge if that's what you're interested in. That doesn't have to come from the legal side. I mean, like nonprofit management, you can study that in a business school program. You can get an MBA in nonprofit business management. So there's a lot of like practical skills there that you need to be able to work in this sector. I'm trying to get through these questions. Yeah.
I see one about the like, and maybe I know we're getting to the end of our time. So like, I hope, and I really hope that we have not sounded negative about this. Liz and I are trying to be realistic because we want to be honest about our advice and our experience. But, at this point, we were doing this, like starting this process, 6 or 7 years ago. We see a lot of change and growth in this issue as awareness grows. I am really optimistic because I see how much work there needs to be done. And just because the frameworks aren't there yet, don't give up. I would say everybody should have the opportunity to pursue working on something that they're interested in. And if you are interested in this, I think find a way to fit it into whatever you're working on and things will follow. Another practical skill I should say, and I like to stress, don't be afraid about writing articles. This is something I was like terrified of and still am, but I give the advice like just write, just submit to stuff. You don't have to have a PhD to write articles. Worst case scenario, it doesn't get accepted, that's not a crime. So move on, but practice writing because it's going to help you no matter what kind of job you get into, expressing your ideas, keep that research muscle flexing if you're still considering going into academia. And you don't have to write about this topic. Like I would practice, I would just do like exhibition reviews or, random like short articles just to, practice. And I would say, be willing to do that, co-author, whatever you need to do. A lot of professors have a lot of research sitting on their desk that they haven't been able to publish, and they may be more than happy to have a co-author or two on a couple of papers to get out the door. So don't be intimidated by that or hesitate. I think really try to do that. And like I said, we really want this to hopefully be positive. We're really excited to see so many people interested in this field. I'll just put these links here for you all in case you're interested, but I'll throw my email in the chat. You're welcome to email me anytime. And Liz, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I just threw my email in the chat as well. For any of you, I realize I missed a couple direct messages in the chat, so please do email me. I'm happy to chat and we can set up a time to talk. That goes for all of you as well. Please do reach out if you have any questions, and feel free to contact me on LinkedIn if you would like to do so there. We're always willing to chat and help however we can. And yeah, I hope this was helpful.
A huge thank you to Helena and to Liz for joining us today. This has been so wonderful and so informative. We haven't had many sessions on topics on careers and cultural heritage, so I certainly learned a ton that I've never heard before about it. It's not my field, but it's a ton. So thank you so much for sharing all of your practical experience, for being honest with us. This group really appreciates that, right? People looking to get jobs. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a fantastic Friday.